I don't really want to do much of a presentation because you have got the handout in front of you. Other topics, apparently, according to the little flyer before the movie started, were more on the scientific side of things. What I wanted to approach tonight is more on the religious and philosophical sides, talking about death consciousness. So, did you get a chance to read your handout?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got a couple of things right there in front of you. I would like to do tonight more of a discussion section than anything else. So if you guys don't talk, this is going to be a very quiet room. Okay, so the first question I want to begin with is this. Death is an extremely sensitive topic. If I ask too many questions about death, it becomes this extremely personal thing. So the first question, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. How would you explain death to a small child?
Well, if I were doing
When the
it
instructor
to-
looks down, that means I'm still giving you time to think. Time's up. Ted, yes.
Well,
How would
if
you
I were
explain
doing
death
it
to a small child?
If I were doing it to a small child, I probably would say some mumbo jumbo such as is, I don't know, acceptable in society, in general society. But that's, you know, I don't believe that, but that's what I would say to a small.
Then why would you say that to a small child?
Because,
And when I ask these why questions, I'm not picking, I'm trying to
yeah,
get through the
okay.
answer.
Well, I could say death is the cessation of all activity in the body and the beginning of decomposition of the body, and eventually it'll all rot away.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, how would you explain death to a small child?
It's very difficult because below the age of 9, children do not have a concept of death. It's only until we move into Piaget's formal thought that we're able to deal with death. Young children think very concretely, so it's really difficult.
A lot of these ideas we're coming back to, but I want to hear other people first. Somebody had their hand up? Yeah.
I'll pre-qualify. I'm a Christian pastor, so I would explain that God created our body, placed our life inside of us. We are a very temporary vessel. We're here for a short time, and then when we die, our soul, who we are, continues on, and our body stays here, and we go to be with Jesus.
Okay. I'm holding these. What else?
To continue the discussion on Piaget, I think children are capable, after a certain point, of understanding what death is and the finality of it, and telling them that that person is dead and that they're not going to be here anymore. I think that a child can understand that to a point. And I think it's important to explain to them that that person is no longer here, or that animal. And a good way of saying that is they went to cat heaven, or they went to heaven. And that gives a child, I think, something they can visualize where that person went to, even though they didn't go anywhere.
Have you yourself had to talk to a small child, or a young child? You tell me what age, you can, whatever. Have you yourself have ever had to talk to a young child about death of a cat, death of a pet, of a
I
grandparent?
have not, but I do remember my parents talking to me when I was 3 and 4. You know, my grandma's cat dying, and then a year later my aunt committed suicide. And I do remember my dad explaining to me that Aunt Darla's gone. She's dead. She's not coming back. Even though I didn't quite understand what suicide meant, I understood that, you know, she's no longer present.
What else? Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to my niece when she was a preschooler. Their cat got ran over, and so she wanted to know what happened to the cat. And I said, well, it's turning back into dirt. And she looked at me very quizzically, and she said, so we're made out of dirt, you know? And so she was a preschooler, and I think she got it. I mean, as far as I can tell. And you know, there was a man lived here in Salina. He was an elderly man. And I think children understand death. That he told me, he said, you know, the first money I made was when I was a little boy, that my grandmother would give me a nickel for each kitten that I put into a burlap bag with a rock tied to the top shut and threw it out into the pond. So he understood exactly what was going on. He got it.
Leaving that, yes.
I think children understand too. My dad died when he was 7 and he was 9. And they understood. I mean, he had been sick, and we told him, you know, that he had died, that he had gone to heaven. And I think they totally understood that.
I remember at 4, I had a puppy that got ran over. He ran into the street and was killed, and I knew he was dead, but I didn't, and I have a very vivid memory of that, but I don't remember associating anything other than lack of life. Just, okay, puppy was here, puppy is dead, and I was upset.
Somebody else said, yeah, you had your hand up.
My experience is not, it's a little different. I don't believe in heaven. I think that this is it now, and that's it, and when you die, you're decomposing, et
And we have
cetera.
multiple points of view, that's the whole point of the
Right,
discussion.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, and then, so how would you explain to a child about that?
I'd speak the truth, completely truth, and that's it.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
I believe all too often we stray from the bad parts of death when talking to children. We stray from, giving them the hard facts, giving them hard things to conceive of because we want to keep them pure. And honestly, if I were to tell a child about death, I would be just very upfront about it. I would be very, not graphic, but I would definitely be very real about it.
You were gonna say something first.
Yeah, we have the joy of being adoptive grandparent-like figures in a couple of small brother and sister that are
Grandkids
basic-
are way better than kids.
Well, yeah, and adopted ones are even easier. But at any rate, we were able with these two children to know both of their maternal grandparents, and were pretty much in a best friend position with these children when their two maternal grandparents passed, oddly within a couple of months of each other, despite a life apart and years ago divorce between this couple. But and at that time, the little girl was just only possessing language. She was in her 2s. And at the actual interment, she got it. She very plainly just said bye-bye in the end of the ceremony, clearly understanding that Grandma Judy was gone. These kids raise animals and see the chicks and the chickens come and go, and I don't think death is as mysterious to somebody who hasn't really got a firm grip on what is life yet.
What were you gonna say, Mark?
For me, I think the main thing is that I think small children can understand that somebody dies and they're gone, somebody born and they're here. But I think the main thing that I kind of subscribe to is that they're not dead and gone. They're not dead and gone to heaven. They're not dead and decayed into the ground. Their body may be gone and buried and decaying in the ground, but they live on in our hearts. And I think that's the main point, especially to give to small children or anybody who's had a loved one die, is that their legacy lives on because we have memory of the person or the animal who's passed.
Right.
What else? Yes.
When my son was about 4 years old, we had a puppy that passed away. And he wanted to know, the puppy was really sick. And his question was not so much
Turn a
what,
little bit, you're in front and you're facing away from.
his question was not so much what happens now. His question was, are they coming back? And so the thing to talk to him about was his grief, was how to get through the sadness and the fact that they weren't coming back. The puppy wasn't coming back. So he didn't even ask me about, what happens now that the puppy's in the ground, or, we had a funeral to say goodbye. Because, and just to explain to him that that's what happens. That's the cycle of life. That's what, we didn't get into detail like, when you get older, you're gonna die too, But just to help him understand that the puppy wasn't coming back and that it was okay to be sad, and, that was the process for him.
So you focus more on the person asking than the puppy.
Yeah, to answer his questions, because when kids are that small, they're gonna be so direct
Right.
about what they're asking. They're gonna be very specific. They're not gonna say, do we have a spirit? Is it doing whatever? They're just gonna ask, do I get to see them again? Or, I can't even think of questions I might have asked at that age, but for him, that's what he asked me.
You had your hand up.
Interestingly enough,
Turn a little bit because we're in, yeah.
when it was when my father died, and I had a niece and nephew who were like, I think 4 and 6, 2 and 4, whatever. But we weren't people of faith. We were kind of generic. You believe in heaven. Doesn't everyone believe in heaven? And so it was interesting that we explained. Yeah, not really. But a lot of people believe in that generic.
It was
who
the
knows?
suburbs.
But I just found it interesting because we explained it to them and went on, but each time we would go to the cemetery, it would be very concrete questions like, does Grandpa have a bed down there? Or, and so I really see it as a process with young children that you explain it in very simple terms, but then again, you have to explain it again, and as they mature, you explain it perhaps a little bit differently. And for most of us, all of us, I would say, we do work our own faith commitments into that explanation at some point. But I look back and I kind of giggle at how concrete they were. That's what they wanted to know. What was it like?
Yeah.
Their stories kind of remind me. I told you my dad
Use your
died.
playground voice. You're way in back.
I'm sorry. My dad died when he was around 7. And shortly after that, our cat died. And at the same time, we were going to a church, and one of his friends, his mom died of cancer, all at the same time. And he kind of went through a depression, and he was getting stomach aches. And I remember one night we were in the emergency room because his stomach was just bothering him, something awful, and we wanted to check to make sure there was nothing serious. And he was finally broke and told me. We were sitting in the emergency room, and he said, when I grow up, I want to be a scientist and help sick cats like Garfield. I said, oh, that's a nice thing to do. He goes, of course, by then, you'll have passed away. So that was in his mind.
The logic is flawed.
That was his logic. Because my dad had died, the cat had died, a friend's mom had died. He thought that I would die by the time he was grown up. So I think it really does go with the ages, of what kids understand.
What else? Who hasn't had a chance yet? Okay, let's take one step backward. Let's deconstruct this question. Why did I begin by asking about explaining about death to a small child?
Simplified terms.
Simplify terms. All right, when a small kid asks about death, let's simplify our terms. What are they asking?
Where are they?
How is this going to affect me?
And let's go even one step back. What's a small child asking when they ask about death?
Why?
Am I going to die?
Going to happen?
See what's going on? The idea is there is I didn't write about it in the tote sheet here, but death consciousness. One of the things about death, or about being a human, is death consciousness. Philosophically speaking, that is the only thing. Now, we are the only species that has a death consciousness. We are the only species that are aware that we will have a terminal point to our existence somehow. Animals may be afraid in the moment. They may be self-defensive in the moment. They might have to fight in order to survive in the moment. But they don't have any sort of future awareness that their life will cease at some point in time. Only humans have a death consciousness. Okay, so, did you have your hand up? Are you just stretching? That's fine, that's fine. Stretch away, I mean, that's good. Okay, next question, all right? Have I convinced you we have a death consciousness? Can I get an amen?
Yeah.
Amen, okay. Does that make life more valuable or less?
Depending on.
Wait a minute, I've lowered my head, that's a sign that you're supposed to be thinking. It's a teacher trick. Okay, more valuable or less?
More.
Because?
Because you have all this time to think about it.
Think about what?
About what have you done? And the timeliness. How come some people are gone, boom, in a few days, a few years, and some are 100? What's the difference and why?
And that's, I think, what small children are asking, except they don't have the vocabulary. If they see it happening, whether it's a cat or an aunt or a grandparent, the question is still, am I going to die? They don't have the vocabulary. Who else? Yeah.
Well, I think it makes life more valuable.
Because?
Well, because life is it's a limited quantity. I mean, it's you know, your time is limited, and I think you appreciate other people and other things more. And I think it may also lead to a lifelong learning. You know, a desire to learn more, so that you understand the rather well, the preciousness of what we know and understand.
What else? Somebody else say their hand up? Death consciousness. Does it make life more valuable or less? Who hasn't talked yet? Yeah, Meredith.
More valuable, I think.
Because?
It depends on how you look at the concept of time, but I think that time becomes more valuable, and then the quality of life goes up because, hopefully, I guess in the best case scenario, if you start thinking about how much time you have left, then you're going to start spending that time in more valuable ways.
Interesting psychological experiment I just heard about the other day. They asked terminal cancer patients about their quality of life, and of course the answer was they feel pretty low. And they asked people who've had a sudden financial windfall, new job, investments, whatever, the quality of their life, and of course obviously they felt pretty good about it because you know, they got more money now, okay? Months later, they went and asked the same people about the quality of their life. When the excitement of the financial windfall has worn off and the shock of the diagnosis has worn off, they have found that the level of happiness with the quality of their life pretty much levels out. Because, and they give a lot of fancy answer and a lot of statistics that I didn't quite get. But the bottom line, the reason is because by and large, we cope. By and large, we cope. We figure out what to do, and then we do it. Couple of things I wanted to highlight from this. I got to be conscious of time. They're telling me. What's the big deal about being dead? Why did Shmuel, was he so concerned about his wife? This is an information question from the movie. Why was Shmuel so concerned about his wife? Because?
Because he believed that her soul would not rest until she was decayed.
And where did he get this idea?
From his religious teachings.
Hasidic Jewish, extremely Orthodox, very strong beliefs about what the soul is all about. What else? Why was Shmuel concerned about his wife's body?
He was afraid she was still suffering.
Still suffering. How could she still, question for you, how could she still be suffering if she's not alive anymore?
It was his own magical thinking around his grief journey that he felt like that decay process was causing her harm.
So who was the one suffering here?
He was.
Okay, so in other words, his idea was that she is suffering somehow, even though she's beyond any point of feeling any pain whatsoever, because he was suffering, and therefore there's some corresponding life relationship thing going on.
Yeah.
Did I See, when I summarize things, you don't have to agree with me. Got it? Just because my summaries are like, oh, so flawless, you don't have to agree with me. All right, am I right? Now, let's talk about the soul. Some people argue it exists, some people would argue it does not. Okay, we got different spectrums. Why, back up, and I'm going to lower my head and let you think about this for a minute. Why? What's such a big deal about a soul? Enough time. Why? What's the big deal about the soul? Yeah.
Well, it's a way of grasping at the happy thought that something persists after death.
So in other words, we need a soul. Why?
No, I don't, I mean, I don't agree with
No,
that.
you said it. You got to go to the logical extreme, man. Why? Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Why do we need a soul, according to that thinking? What do we
Well,
want?
just to make us feel better about dying, I guess.
Okay. So in other words, remember, in philosophically speaking, whenever somebody makes a claim, there's always something they want, and there's always something they're afraid of. Got it? There's something you want, and there's something you're afraid of. So if you make a claim about a soul, what do you want?
Immortality.
Yeah, immortality.
Immortality. You had some. What were you going to say?
Connection.
Connection.
We want connection. We
Okay.
don't want to be alone.
I think having a soul gives us hope for the future, which then impacts our hope in this life and our attitude and our optimism in this life.
So in other words, we got connection, we have a social connection, we have a character trait, optimism, we have a directional thing, hope for the future. So there's a forward motion. Did you have your hand up? Somebody did?
I did. It's part of our separating ourselves from the animal kingdom in our minds and hearts, because, of course, we can declare ourselves as a species to be the only species with a soul, and therefore have dominion. I'm not sure I agree.
You got to state the
but
idea
that's-
before you know if you agree with it or not.
Right, all right.
Okay, so in other words, we want the soul, we want this differentiation from anything else, we want human connection, we want forward momentum in our lives, some characteristic of hope, okay? These are all good.
Immortality.
These are all good. What are we afraid of when we talk about the soul? Barb,
Not mattering.
not mattering.
Well, afraid of oblivion.
Oblivion,
Finality.
finality,
Judgment.
judgment, good. Okay. Andrew, just adjusting glasses. Okay, just adjusting glasses. I'm trying to be the good teacher here. Yeah,
Well, I think there's one thing that people sort of kick this soul idea around is because of mystical experiences. Mystics all the worldwide say, this isn't just some idea, this is what's happened, this is real, this is just as real as that. So I think that element isn't just an idea, it's as far as I know, worldwide experience.
look at their little handout. Like, I hate to keep going back to this, but like I said, I wanted to have a little handout for you to, something for you to think about while you're in the movie. Look at the social fears at the bottom. Couple of different words, disintegration and dissolution. When they talk about what happens to a corpse after death, those are a couple words you will hear used theologically and philosophically a lot. The body disintegrates. Okay? Disintegrates. Got the root word? Integrate? Integrate means put together properly. The fear of disintegration is not just the fear that the body will decompose, because it obviously does. All you have to do is observably look at it. The pig, the body farm, okay, all that stuff. That poor pig. What a way to go. It's smothered with a plastic bag in somebody's living room. Okay, all right. It is observably, evidentially obvious that things will decompose over time. So the fact of a corpse disintegrating is unmistakable. We have this social embarrassment, this social, not disdain, awkwardness. What exactly do we do with a corpse? What do we do with a corpse? And so consequently, the funeral home industry, and I'm not pro or anti anything here, but the funeral home industry is a big deal because it tells us this is what we do with a corpse. This is a socially acceptable thingamajig that we do to this corpse, okay, because that's how we close off the chapter. Why? Fear of social disintegration. Each of us had some sort of interaction within the social web. Because remember, we never did see his wife. We saw her dead body. Remember when they were cleaning her, when they were doing that ritual bathing thing? Okay, and we saw her wrapped up in the shroud, but we never did see her face at all. And we saw her big toe, which was completely bizarre, but whatever. Okay, whatever, all right?
Tag something.
It was the Dybbuk, all right? It's the Dybbuk flowering or whatever, all right? So we saw his wife, but we didn't know a thing about her. Yes, we did. What did we know about Shmuel's wife?
She had cancer.
How many kids? Or no, she had cancer. She had what else?
2 children.
2 children. And she was what?
Hasidic.
Hasidic, married to Shmuel. She was loved. She was taken care of by the community. We don't know a thing. Well, we didn't know anything about her face or whatever. I'm racking my brains. Did they ever give a name?
Yes.
Rivka.
What was it?
Rivka at the end.
Rivka. Okay. Thank you. I couldn't remember. She had a name. She had relationships, etc. So she has a social interactive capacity. All right? When one person dies, has society disintegrated? This is the fear. If we lose somebody, okay, have we lost some part of our own self? So disintegration is a big term when you're talking about after death. The second word is dissolution. This is a much more complicated term. Theoretically, if you let things go at the body farm long enough, they will just revert back to bones, an unrecognizable mass of something. An unrecognizable mass of something. Dissolution means dissolve. Okay, given enough time and given the right set of circumstances, the corpse will dissolve pretty much into nothing. Theoretically, you could wait long enough and the bones would dissolve, depending on the acidity of the soil, all that stuff, fine. So the question is this, the social fear is this. All right, we can handle disintegration because we can cope somehow. But is this going to bring about social dissolution? Has society failed somehow because we lose somebody? You see the social fears here? How has society disintegrated? What have we lost? Can we pull together or not? Second one is, are we just going to completely lose it as a society? See the 2 social fears going on? All right? I'm a philosopher. We talk in these terms. Okay, get used to it, all right? Then how do you address these fears? How do you address the fear that society will disintegrate without a person? That's long enough, okay?
History.
Yeah.
I see
Hang on.
with the passing of the great generation, the World War II generation, there's talk that society has disintegrated or is changing in a way because of the loss of the values that were held by that generation.
Okay, so in other words, it's not just a individual death, it's more of a generational loss. You lose a certain generation that focused on certain values and virtues, and when they're gone, society has changed into something.
I think if one person is significant enough and the society is built upon that one person, you lose that person and you lose a considerable part of that society's character.
Okay. Hang on, you had something.
Following on what was just said, the idea of preserving the body, of course, has a lot of history in Egypt and so forth. And in Egypt, there was a terrible revolution that split the whole kingdom at one point because the body of one of the pharaohs had been stolen. And the figurehead was then gone. And the dissolution did occur after this, not after the death, but after the stealing.
So in other words, it was not a fear, it was a reality.
Immortal body.
The political and social structure did dissolve.
It did.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I
No,
think
you had
in the movie, I think you saw them trying to address the fears with some prescribed rituals. That it's been enough time, and it's time to make the sewing of the garments, and it's time to date again. And so they didn't want to lose him to his children, to his faith religion, to do the cantering because the other guy sings like a goat. So they were trying to use ritual to keep him in the confines of coming back, not getting lost in his
So
faith.
the social rituals are allowed for us to make sure that we can lose somebody, but we don't fall apart in the process.
Yeah,
And I always joke about in American, you know, you have 3 days for funeral leave if you have any, and then you're supposed to be back in function.
And it's supposed to be back in function, absolutely.
Couldn't
Yeah.
hear that.
I think it's interesting that one of the ways that we deal with that is the funeral industry. We embalm and we put them in satin and we dress them up, and what do we all say? Oh, they look like they're sleeping. And then at funerals, not ones that I would do, but what are all of our bad empty phrases? You know, they've gone to be with God, God needed another flower,
needed
or
another
they're
angel,
sleeping
or
eternally.
Better
Or
place.
all those things that we use to deny that they're out of our social sphere.
Is it denial or is it therapy?
I would, well, you know me, I would
Denial
say
is
it's
therapy.
very iffy, and I would say I base my judgments on my own sincerest faith commitments, whether they're empty phrases
Right.
or whether they're coming from, well, I'm judging about my own faith convictions.
Yeah. I probably got everybody out of sequence. I'm sorry. There's a bunch of you and there's one of me. Yes, ma'am.
So going off of that, I would say that those are less therapy and a little bit more denial, simply because it's an invalidation of that person. That person can take that as invalidation, simply because when talking about death and stuff like that, it's really difficult to talk about grief. It's really difficult to, you know, check on someone through their grief because it creates an awkward conversation. So to dismiss that person's feelings is also to just, you know, put it out of your own mind and say, hey, I did something about this person's grief. And going on the dissolution, I do have a question. What do you mean by society? And what do you mean by the importance of the individual?
Oh, are you ready for this? This is going to be good. What do you think? You knew it was coming. You knew it was coming.
Why
Hang on
don't
just
you
a
answer
minute.
my question with a question?
Yeah, really.
Seriously, okay, what do you think? Okay, I'll give you a quick down and dirty, but then you have to do a little bounce back on this. Social groups, plural, you belong to. Yeah, no. That's what I'm saying by society. Social groups you belong to, simply because it has to do with the integration of the individual into the groups.
Okay.
What do you think? Back to you.
Honestly, I think that, like, you know, the loss of the individual doesn't make it all fall apart. It's like losing maybe a window in a house. There's a hole there for a while until that hole gets fixed or filled in by something else.
Okay, so in other words, we can talk about social loss, but that's not the same as social disintegration. Okay, yes.
I don't think society, I think people's fear is their family. What would my family do if I was not here? And I think the movie did a good job of that. I mean, we had an Orthodox Jew burying a pig. That showed his grief that he
I'm
was
saying
touched.
by being here.
He touched an unclean animal that was, according to his strict beliefs, unclean, but he did it because of that loss that he had experienced. And I think that goes back to the social, because he lost a part of his family.
So you could even say that's a moment when the social group, the Hasidic Jews, they're not helping you that much. There's a grief that is bigger than what society can help you with. And so you just have to sin a little. I mean, you know, don't go crazy.
Right.
But I mean, you gotta hold the pig sometimes.
Right.
He said, I stole the pig, it's up to you to kill it. I don't know where, but I'm gonna use that line somewhere. Yes, ma'am.
I think that because we have, as a society, had made this agreement that we're going to outsource the care of our own deceased loved ones to an industry, that we have lost something as a society that we can't even put a qualitative measure on. Like, what is it that we have lost as a societal group, as families, as communities, by paying someone else to care for our dead? Now,
That sounds like a rhetorical question. What do you think?
I think we've
You knew it was
lost a
coming.
lot, yeah.
What have we lost, do you feel like, by outsourcing the care? I've been talking in the paper about the corpse. I don't know what else to talk about. Okay, that's the point. So what have we lost as a society by outsourcing the care of the corpse?
Well, full disclosure, I've opened a green cemetery outside of Salina. And it's a restoration prairie project. And at the cemetery, we encourage the family and community members to fully participate in the burial of their own dead. So they will lower the body into the grave, they will fill the grave, they can come out and dig the grave themselves if they want, but having a meaningful involvement in the care of their deceased loved one is an extraordinary experience. Like, it's culturally unfamiliar, and yet this ordinary task that we as humans did for millennia for each other. And now we leave it to the professionals and don't have a way to unless you're invited and this is okay. It's okay to be a part of this.
You partially answered the question, but I'll ask you, what function does that serve?
I think it's really healing. I think it's really truth. It's speaking truth about the depth of the connection that we have with each other, how we're going to make it as a community group without this person. We all are able to go the distance for that person.
It's not really a funeral until somebody tells the first dirty joke.
And then the whole
That's not
thing
from
of
that movie.
being able to, fertilize, one of the lines in there where he said, I think the best thing you could do is become fertilizer, become good fertilizer, and there we are, pushing up prairie plants.
Somebody over here did you have your hand up? Somebody over here? I take it now. Yes.
I think it gives us that opportunity to grieve and that opportunity to really care and connect for that person, especially if you're doing the actual care and you're doing the bathing and you're doing the every part before you're wrapping them in a shroud and lowering them into the ground.
Yeah.
If you're able to really do all that care, you get that intimacy with that person that really would allow you to grieve and connect with them before, as you're burying them.
And same question as her. What function does grief serve?
I think that it serves as a closure and the building the connection and the building the memory and that will move you beyond that.
Yes.
Well, I for one, when my dad keeled over dead, I didn't need to be the one that went out and picked him up and wiped his butt. I was perfectly fine with somebody else doing that, and I mean, I'll grant you it's literature, but I think William Faulkner did a nice job of telling about when people had to bury their own family, it could be a hell of a mess.
Yes, Bart.
At the same time, I think that the way that we do funerals now does a disservice to the idea that we're born and we die, because when we buried my dad, he was embalmed. He felt like plastic. If you touched his face, it was plastic, and it wasn't him anymore. And then they put him in this coffin that had all the satin and metal and wood, and it was heavy, and then they put him in a crypt in the ground. So they put him in this cement, and the whole idea of remember, man, that you are dust, and into dust you shall return. I don't know how he's ever going to turn back into dust in that environment. So I think we've just really removed ourselves from returning to the earth.
And all these zombie movies, how do they get out?
I don't know how we do it.
Do you know how heavy dirt is? Yes.
I think it started even before the death because she died in the hospital, and we used to die at home, and now more and more often you die in a hospital or in a hospice or in a nursing home and not in the home that you own or the home of loved ones.
In your estimation, what would be a good way to reclaim the social or individual acceptance of death of a loved one? If we have the hospital is somewhat clinical, and the funeral home is somewhat clinical, and the handling of the corpse is somewhat distance ourselves with the satin and the steel box and the vault, right? What would be a good ritual, do you think? What do you think would be a good ritual for death? That was a question where I was going. This was just my opportunity to go there.
Well, I think it's very individualistic, and so when my dad died of cancer, he had been in the hospital and said, I want to go home, I'm done with this fight, I want to go home, and we brought him home, and siblings took turns, staying with my mom and him. And the morning that he died, I got a call asking if I wanted to come back over, and I did not want to. I had told him goodbye the night before. I knew that we were close. But my other sister and my brother went back to the home, and, they put his Air Force hat on him, and they wanted that time before he was picked up.
So the home environment, the Air Force hat, the kids taking turns,
Personalizing it.
okay. Yeah,
I think that what is very difficult for us is identity. So you have a family member, and that one of these family members dies, and that changes every identity of every person inside the family at that time, and they're at a nexus, in a crisis. But to answer the question about what could we do that would make death of a family member more sort of healthy as the people that remain experience it, would be that instead of having, I can understand outsourcing medicine, but hospice, I think, should be a training program for people who are taking care of the individual as opposed to anybody kind of taking over. And it's very often this way. They come in, they train people what to expect, when to call for help, when not to, and so forth. But that whole loss of connection, especially if the person is disjunct from the family, maybe they're in a care home of some kind, and you don't really have the option. The person might not be sufficiently communicative to be able to have high-value deathbed conversations with them. But nonetheless, the more that the outsourcing takes the family from the individual who's going through the death process.
what were you gonna say?
Oh, me?
Yeah, I thought you had your hand up.
The other thing that hasn't been mentioned here, but it's really changed a lot, I think, in the last 40 or so years, is the switch to cremation. That instead of the super embalmed, keep the body alive, plastic forever in a box in the ground, and the natural, old-fashioned, Hasidic way where you put the body in a decomposable organic box in a shroud and let it return to fertilizer. I think we're up to half or more that are cremated, where you waste a bunch of natural gas and dispose of the body essentially in 45 minutes. And the ritual that comes out of it is you get a little canister of your beloved one's ashes and you go do something with that. And a lot of times it's distributing the ashes to places that person loved. But how does that fit in with what we've seen here today?
Great question, what do you think?
Well, I think I said pretty much everything I could. It speeds up the decomposition dramatically. It gets from weeks and weeks that we saw in the movie or years maybe, to 45 minutes. Then you've got a decomposed body with very little left.
I wouldn't really want to pick up on what you said. Go ahead.
But then the other thing that goes with it in a lot of cases is the ritual of what you do with those ashes and how you talk about that person.
The place, how you talk about that person, and you said about the places they went. A couple of times on the handout, we talk about persistence of memory. All right, persistence of memory is one of the things that makes a person a person. Okay, you are who you are because you have an aggregate of memories that does not correspond with anyone else's. You are considered irreplaceable. I mean, that sounds like, you're a romance talk. You're irreplaceable in my heart. No, it's not romantic. That is just socially a fact. You are irreplaceable because nobody has the same aggregate of memories and experiences you do. And nobody has put your experiences together like you have, so you become irreplaceable because your persistence of memory is different from anyone else's. We have triplet grandkids. Same mom, same dad, live in the same house. Two of them are identical. Okay, they're going to be as different as night and day eventually. How? because they process memories different, their experiences hit them different. They have, obviously, they have a lot in common. They even look alike. All right, they have a lot in common, but they have an irreducible aggregate of memory that persists over time. Well, that persistence of memory is not just individual, it is a social persistence of memory. You have become part of the process. We joke, we got 4 kids. We always joke about on any given day, we only want 3 out of 4. But it depends which one we want to get rid of. Can I get an amen, guys? All right? Obviously, we're laughing because there is no acceptable loss when it comes to children. There is no collateral damage that is acceptable in terms of children. They are irreplaceable somethings because not only do they have their own persistence of memory, we have a persistence of social integration with them. So, to take the ashes back to the places the loved one loved the most is part of the communal memory. This matters. You might have thought that Kankakee, Illinois was the dumbest town you'd ever seen, but it meant something to them and they mean something to you, so therefore Kankakee looks pretty good right about now. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I just...
Or have we wandered way
I
past
thought it's so interesting that he was part of a faith tradition that really prescribed what needed to be done with the body after death. And all these rituals that were part and parcel of that, you know, with him cutting his coat and then the women bathing the body, wrapping her in the shroud, the burial happening within 13 hours. All of this was just like going by the ritual rule book. And yet it didn't serve him. He needed something more. He needed to
What
have
did he need more?
that experience of doing it himself, because he was distant
And to talk about
as
death.
prescribed, you know, by the religion. He couldn't be there to care for her body.
Did you see the rabbi told him to think about who?
The boys and
His 2
himself.
boys.
Yeah.
His mother told him to think about who?
The boy.
The boys and
And take
himself.
care of
Yeah,
himself.
yeah, him.
Take care of himself.
The widow from Muncie. Okay? Both of those people, the rabbi and the mother, were talking, they weren't talking about rituals, they weren't talking about death rituals. What were they talking about? Life. Continuity of life. Okay, forward motion, direction, some sort of relational thing. You do realize that there is a community that matters that you are responsible for. And you do realize that there was a forward momentum to life. You might like this widow from Muncie. She seemed real nice in the movie. All right? You may say, well, that's not being faithful to your wife. Okay, fine. But if you've got the morning rituals, and the morning rituals say, okay, we're done now, all right, then the forward momentum of life. Shmuel's problem was not that he didn't know the rituals, it's just that he didn't know anything else.
Right.
All right? And did you notice? I've watched too much movie. There's too much film theory going in my head. Notice all the times they dug in the ground, they never got dirty. Until when?
They did in the rain.
The rain.
And they were digging up who in the rain?
They're rigging up the wife.
So in
The
other
actual
words,
body.
he never got dirty until he took care of who?
His wife.
What's the title of the movie?
Dust.
Got it? See that little literary trope there was the dirt. The trope was the dirt. He never got dirty working with the pig or climbing the fence to look at the body farm, nothing like that. He didn't get dirty until he had to dig up his own wife because he returned back to the dirt that she came from. Now, if I had told you this evening, if you told me this evening, we're going to go watch a movie about a grave robber, and he's the good guy. Nah, okay. But we just watched a movie about a grave robber, and he's the good guy. Oh, you see what's going on? See that cinematic trope there? I don't even know what my time frame is. Okay, good. Okay. What's the big deal about being dead? Things about life. This is what makes a human a human. Where do we factor religious factors into that? Religious factors come into it in terms of social communities that give meaning to life. Social meaning communities. I come from a Methodist church. We are so middle of the road. We own the middle of the road, people. Okay, we own it. The coffee's not much, but the potlucks are great. Okay. All right, it's great to be Methodist. Okay. But if you were to say that the Hasidic community views it different, or any other community views it different, that's fine, because you have a different community creating meaning. You got communal meaning structures. What makes a person? We have rational thought. We have freedom of self-directed action. We have social interaction of some sort. We can have experiences and reflection upon those experiences. Persistence of memory. All these things make us different from animals. All these things make us different from animals. All right? What's the problem? Back to the first line again. What's the big deal about being dead? Everything that makes you a person is taken away instantaneously, arbitrarily, permanently. Okay, there is no second act after all these things have been taken away. Yeah.
Except if you are a writer, musician, artist, composer, those things remain.
Because you just turned to the back of the page. Thank you for doing that.
Oh.
Communal awareness, persistence of memory. That is part of the communal memory. Okay, the artists, the composers, even if you are not a creative artist, even if you are just a parent or a good coworker or a good member of your civic organization or church organization, you're good at something. You see what's going on? Therefore, you have a legacy of something, whatever it may be. Whatever it may be, you have a part in the social interaction. That is the social persistence of memory. Somebody was here, now they are gone. How are we going to carry on without them? And the answer is somehow. Right. Because we always have. We always have. I cannot think of anything more horrifying than the intentional slaughter of another human being, and I cannot think of anything more socially disruptive than the intentional slaughter of an elected official. Okay, because think John Kennedy. Okay, you may not like John Kennedy, you may not. That's not the point. The point is he is a duly elected official to guide our country, elected through due process of law that society has put their trust in. And so for someone to negate the social process is unthinkable. And somebody dies in the process. So ramp that up. The thought of termination of another human being is pretty much unthinkable. Hang on, let me say one thing so we got the last few minutes in here. The other reason, what's the big deal about being dead? The other one is quasi-personhood, which is a fancy way of saying the corpse, the dead person, the loved one, whoever, may not have any of this stuff, but they're close enough. They're close enough. They belong to a group that did have this stuff at this point in time. Therefore, they deserve this amount of respect. Therefore, we owe them, we have this duty. We owe them this amount of respect. See the relationship going on even after death? They deserve it. We owe it. They have no capacity of interacting with us anymore, but the relationship goes on. See what's happening? That's why we have funerals. That's why we have the scattering of the ashes in Kankakee, Illinois. All right? Simply because they may not have anything that makes a person, but they're close enough. Close enough.
So
Yes,
how do
ma'am.
you factor in the images of people in Yemen and the endless war that's conducted all over the world? And, you know, where does that, what's the big deal of being dead? Where's that question go?
Because
for
people
that?
arrogate for themselves the right to choose who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
And I mean, socially speaking, we have many socially approved forms of death. Warfare, medical triage. Okay, see what I'm saying? There are many socially approved forms of inflicting death, but the responsibility of inflicting death never goes away. That's because society has determined that we will take responsibility for that. I think a lot of the killing you see in various places around the world is not a social activity, it's vigilante justice, which is not, it has no social legitimacy at all.
Right.
Yes, sir.
I think that human psychology really changed a great deal at the end of World War II when we, as a species, grasped the idea that we may be able to self-exterminate.
We can annihilate things.
And of course, now we've got another break in what might be called the great chain of being. It's hard to tell kids everything's going to be okay. Don't forget to wear your air mask today. But for us to tell them everything's going to be okay, and by the way, you may not have a future, has changed the relationship of children and now adults to not only their own death, but that of possibly the world or their society. So I think that there's a shift in how we view life, because we are possibly on the brink of doing some real damage there too.
And I think that brings us full circle. We started talking about children and death. We end up talking about children and death on a grand scale. Thank you for your participation. Like I said, I wanted to make sure that this was as interactive as possible. This is not a conducive environment for discussion, but we'll do what we can, folks. We do what we can. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to be here. Thank you all.